Before we begin, an exciting announcement.
Oh, have we received an email?
More exciting.
Oh, has Alex Jones decided to sponsor us?
Probably not as exciting as that.
Glenn Beck is going to sponsor us with his massive gold bullions?
More exciting?
So, a new patron?
Yes, no longer are we totally reliant on the good graces of Amalgamated Conspiracy. No. Now, one Daniel, last name redacted to protect the guilty, has chipped in their hard-earned...
We assume they might be a lazy criminal after all.
Not that we think all criminals are necessarily lazy, but some are. It's just a fact. Anyway, Daniel, if that even is their real first name, has become just the latest patron to patronize us via the internet.
And all they got for their effort was a mention in this here introduction. Are you happy, Daniel? Are you?
You really shouldn't be. This episode, we're just snarking at a listicle. Roll those credits.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name is Josh Addison in Auckland, New Zealand. His name is M. Dentith in Bucharest, Romania. And that is all we have to say.
Hello there! It's true.
Thank you once again to our new patron. Thank you to our existing patrons. We like having patrons. And their
And a provisional thank you for future patrons who now feel jealous about the existence of past and current patrons and are readying their digital wallets to provide us with cash and Bitcoin in perpetuity. We thank you for your thoughts.
Now, last week we did say that since we'd been talking about Syria and chemical weapons attacks against civilian populations, and it was all just a little bit grim and depressing, that we should try and do something possibly more light-hearted this week. So we've decided to just go for a bit of good old-fashioned piss-takery.
And what a piss-taking we're undertaking. This can't think of a word that also uses undertaking as the end of that sentence.
We'll just imagine that you did. Yes, so basically we've essentially found a slightly silly listicle on the internet and we're going to mock it mercilessly. Not really fair, but it should be amusing. Well, not really amusing.
Indeed.
It should fill the time.
Well, shall we push on from this short introduction into the fun and excitement of a little bit of news?
I think that's the best idea.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
We start this week with perjury.
Because we mean to start as we plan to go on.
There's been a bit of a crisis going on back here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, due to the use of prison witnesses.
What we used to call snitches or jailhouse spooks.
And cases where convictions have relied on said witnesses who have turned out to have lied in court.
Now, there's no real procedure in our judicial system here to signal when a witness might be a jailhouse snitch, and the police have admitted to keeping no real record about prison witnesses and situations where they have decided to not use them in the prosecution of suspected criminal activity.
Now this has led to questions, particularly after some high-profile conviction quashings like the Tainapora matter we discussed last year, where people are asking both what role should prison witnesses play in the prosecution of crimes, and are the police not keeping information about the role of prison witnesses in order to cover up the suspicious use of them?
I.e., are the police selectively using prison witnesses to secure convictions?
Now the New Zealand Police Force is saying no, and that everything they do is above board and legal.
Now, the latter is true. There is nothing illegal about using a snitch, jailhouse or not, but whether it is above board, given the lack of records, is now an open question, especially since former snitches and former inmates are talking about how jailhouse spooks often get benefits in return for their testimony.
There are now calls for New Zealand to adopt a UK, US or Canadian style system of safeguards for the use of prison witnesses. It'll be interesting to see what, if any, pushback there is from the police should these recommendations go ahead.
And now, an update. You might recall that several episodes ago we talked about the recent revelations about the death of US President and heartthrob John F. Kennedy. A trove of previously classified information was released, showing that no matter who you think actually shot JFK, there were grounds to think there had been a cover-up around how much people knew about Lee Harvey Oswald and his potentiality as a lone gun person prior to the events in Dallas.
At the time, we mentioned that a significant number of documents had not been released at the time, as they needed further vetting. President Trump had said he wanted all the documents released, however, and it was expected that come late April, that would happen.
It didn't. Near 16,000 documents concerning the assassination are now due to be released in 2021 at the earliest.
Now, to be clear, some of this concerns redactions on already available documents, so the number of completely unreleased materials on the assassination is much lower. However, given Trump had said everything should be released but has now toed the government line that some secrecy is still necessary concerning things like the location of CIA bases in the 1960s...
Presumably because they might still be CIA bases now.
And responses to questions asked of suspects and witnesses at the time,
which might well embarrass members of the establishment or show that they were involved in a cover-up. This is going to remain an open wound for JFK researchers.
And talking about embarrassing secrets, how about the allegation that the recently deceased Barbara Bush was really Aleister Crowley's secret love child?
Yes, this story has made the rounds post the former First Lady's death, and is based upon the fact that Crowley knew Pauline Pierce, Barbara Bush's wealthy socialite mother, during the 1920s. However, the claim Crowley and Pierce engaged in wacky sex magics...
That's not a euphemism, by the way, that's something Crowley did on the regular...
is the product of an April Fool's joke from 2006. Yes, Crowley was acquainted with Pierce, and Crowley did engage in sex magics, but even if Pierce had been in that particular set at the time, the chances of her conceiving Barbara Bush with the world's most wicked man is quite unlikely.
Although it might explain a few things if it were true.
Finally, a warning.
Yes, we'd like to tell our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, and occasional funny person, Rhys Darby, to stop drawing attention to the fact Aotearoa New Zealand often fails to be included on the maps.
Darby, and the PM who he has roped in on his scheme, seeks to uncover the conspiracy as to why our country often fails to be... Oh no, that is correct.
That is correct.
But I'm having reading fails today. Darby, and the PM who he has roped in on his scheme, seeks to uncover the conspiracy as to why our country often fails to be included on maps and representations on the globe, somehow thinking this is some conspiracy against us.
However, what Darby, and we're surprised the Prime Minister has gone along with him, fails to realise is that this is a conspiracy of our own Kiwi making. We're deliberately ensuring that we're no longer on maps and other representations of land masses upon the Earth, so that when the global apocalypse occurs and people seek out a relatively untouched place to seek refuge, no one will know where we are, and thus no one will come and try to invade us.
Indeed, even existing maps, which place us just below Tasmania, are inaccurate. Any further attention drawn to the matter risks revealing where our fair country is actually located.
In short, non-New Zealanders, to quote Gandalf from the Star Wars movies, we're going to live long and prosper, while you can all fuck off.
And now, a little something on that New World Order malarkey.
Yes, that last bit referring to the latest Tourism New Zealand video. I haven't actually watched it. Have you watched the whole thing?
I don't like Rhys Darby. So, I just don't think he's particularly funny, and I made the mistake of travelling in New Zealand quite a lot when he did the traffic safety video, the air safety video, and I just don't find his shtick to be particularly amusing, truth be told.
No, he's not entirely my cup of tea, but I believe it's a bit of a running joke in New Zealand, if you're not aware, that on lots of sort of maps where they're more sort of stylized. Often the ones you sort of see in the background of a supervillain's lair in a movie or something. New Zealand tends to just get dropped off. There'll just be a blob for Australia and no New Zealand next to it. So I'm pretty sure there are blogs where you can see collections of photos of world maps that have New Zealand missing off them. Probably
Indeed, there is an
conspiracy.
entire Reddit thread devoted to
Oh,
it.
there you go. But
If
anyway,
it's on Reddit, it must be on Reddit.
Reddit, yes.
That
But
is the
that's-
conventional wisdom.
That's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, we're talking to an article that I saw on wakeupkiwi.com. Now, wakeupkiwi.com appears to be the New Zealand localized version of wakeupworld.com, which I'm fairly certain I've seen you linking to articles from in the past, but I've never really had much of a look at it myself. Why don't you give us a quick intro to the site before we get into it?
So wakeupkiwi.com was a website I discovered years ago. They have an email list, so essentially every week they send you a digest of all of the articles that they find interesting. And they make it convenient for reading these pieces, because rather than requiring you to click on links and read the pieces on their original websites, they just reproduce the articles on their front page, which is kind of a interesting local conspiracy theory tradition. So we've talked about this magazine in the past, Uncensored Magazine, run by Jonathan Eisen. And Uncensored Magazine essentially is all the conspiracy theories on the internet you would like to read, but you can't even afford dial-up modem technology. So essentially they're all articles online which are printed out in the magazine, often with the hypertext links still there in blue. So you have this weird dissonance of seeing an article, wanting to click on a link and realizing that you're not dealing with smart paper. And Wake Up Kiwi does the same thing in that it reproduces articles from elsewhere, but online. So if you want to then track down the source, you have to then track down the actual source of the article to then find out what other people might be saying about it. And it's just a collection of mostly chemtrail, non-GMO, anti-GMO, and New World Order conspiracy theories. But it appears they're also providing us with 14 ways to protect yourself, not yourself, protect yourself from the NWO agenda. And I want to know, what have they got against the NWO? They were a perfectly fine rap group.
I think that was NWA.
Oh.
NWO is a
I've-
couple of hours.
I've-
I think it was. that was like
I've been misreading the literature for a really long time.
I think possibly they were just the first version, and then after NWA came NWE, and then NWI, and NWO is the latest incarnation. Presumably NWU will show up eventually, but we'll just have to wait until to see what Dr. Dre's up to, I suppose. Him and
That,
IQ
ladies and
get their
gentlemen,
stuff back together.
and people in between, was a joke about vowels.
Sure was. Bit of vowel humour, never goes wrong. Yes, no, this article we've chosen to look at is called 14 Ways to Protect Yourself from the NWO Agenda. It's a little, I acknowledge right off the bat that it's a little bit unfair of us to immediately start picking at the obvious typo in its headline, but frankly that's the tone we intend to take for the rest of this episode, so we might as well get going at the beginning. And there are indeed 14 ways to protect yourself or yourself from the NWO agenda itemized in this little listicle. They cover a few common themes. Some of them are sort of just general fight the power, smash the establishment stuff. Most of them actually just seem to be along the theme of look after yourself and stay healthy, which on the surface is entirely good advice. And then a little bit of doomsday prepper stuff at the end, as we'll see. And indeed, most of the, not most, actually yes, no, I would say most of the claims on this list, if you merely look at the headlines, generally come off as okay advice, really. But then when you actually look into the specifics of why you're giving these pieces of advice, it starts to get a little bit more ropey. But shall we just jump straight in?
Yes, although I suppose what I will say at this point is this list suffers from all the problems that aphorisms generally suffer from, in that it's quite easy to summarize a point and make it sound good, but as soon as you start unpacking that aphorism to try to work out what it means, then you discover the issues, which is why aphoristic philosophy has never appealed to me. Take that, Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. Him and his Superman.
More like Notcha. I bet I'm the first person in the world to have ever made that joke.
Yeah, you must be. So anyway, jumping straight in there. Point 1, stop giving attention to corporate-sponsored news. Which...
All right, first question. What is corporate-sponsored news?
Well, I assume they just mean any news that's produced by any large corporate news organisation, which is most of them really. Essentially, it's saying don't listen to the mainstream media, listen to guys with YouTube channels on the internet.
I'm just curious as to why they've gone with corporate-sponsored news rather than the usual pejorative mainstream media.
Well, there is a lot of anti-corporatism in this list, so maybe that's their preferred way of slamming things they don't like.
And yet at the same time, the people who put forward these kind of lists are very keen for us to listen to Alex Jones. And Alex Jones is also a form of corporate-sponsored news in that there's a big powerhouse behind Alex Jones and his productions. And there's an awful lot of quite explicit sponsorship that also goes on with the Prison Planet and Infowars.com channels. So it's interesting that there are particular kinds of corporate-sponsored news that we're not meant to pay attention to, but there are other kinds of corporate-sponsored news which are A-OK in their books.
So they say, they follow up by saying, learn to research and discern the differences between disinformation and the truth, especially in the case of the internet, which again, I'd say that's probably good advice.
That is good advice. You don't even need to use pejoratives to be describing news sources there. You can simply say, look, sometimes there's going to be disinformation within media narratives, and people need to have the sufficient critical thinking training to be able to discern the difference between what turns out to be, say, a legitimate appeal to epistemic authority and some government mouthpiece spouting off on some issue because that's what the government of the day wants you to believe.
I think once you actually follow the links and get into more detail about how you're supposed to discern the difference between disinformation and truth, things start to become a little more ropey when essentially it's, is the person saying with it connected to any sort of government or corporate entity at all? No, yes, then they're obviously a shill and should not be believed at all. But on the surface of it, not a bad bit of advice. Now the next one, in continuing the theme of fighting the power, point number 2 is stop voting for any of the major political parties. And this things get a little bit more explicitly anti-New World Order. You know, the point is that the political parties, they're all the same. They're all controlled by the same set of global puppet masters financing the New World Order. So it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're going to get screwed in the end. Doesn't really say what you should do instead. I don't know if they mean to imply you shouldn't vote at all, or if you should be voting for minor political parties who are anti-New World Order. Doesn't really go into that.
And I suppose we should point out this is a quite US-centric style listicle as well, where voting for a minor party isn't actually going to get, well, I suppose if everybody voted for the minor parties, then the major parties would stop being the major parties. They'd become the minor parties, and they'd have to be voted for in the next election, because you can't vote for a major party once that minor party becomes major. It just gets very confusing at that point. But of course, in other political systems, say like ours or Germany or anywhere where you have proportional representation, voting for minor parties is actually a strategic thing you can do, to the point where we have a coalition government here made up of one majorish party that got about 36% of the vote on polling day, and then 2 minor parties in coalition with that government. So this advice actually kind of depends on the polity you're in, and my suspicion is the kind of people who are saying stop voting for any of the major political parties would probably consider our minor parties to also be part of the problem, given they get to be in government ipso facto, they are the kind of people that the elites are trying to push into government to give the illusion of democratic representation.
Yes, I think the only other interesting thing about this point was an acronym which I hadn't seen before. They claimed that all of these political parties are backed and financed by they, where they stands for the hierarchy enslaving you.
I would love to have been in the board meeting where the elites came. Now, what we need, Joshua, what we need is we need an acronym. We need something to really be sinister and show our evil machinations going on behind the background. Now, I'm thinking we need to put the word enslavement in there, and we need to talk about the hierarchical nature of the representation or lack of representation the common people have. So could you spitball us a few acronyms that use hierarchy and enslaving in there that will sound innocuous, but also for people in the know will go, oh yeah, they're in charge.
I assume that's what happened. I assume that's exactly word for word what happened. Must have been a...
Well, thank you, Joshua. You've done some brilliant work there, even though you haven't played along with my attempt to do a little bit of a sketch in the middle of this thing.
I was supposed to pick that up. Well, was I supposed to yes and you there? I don't really do.
Yes.
Okay.
And now I can't turn this voice off.
No. Well, do your best while I carry on to the next point. Point number 3 is detoxify yourself. Which, I mean, I understand most detox diets are fairly iffy. If you want to detoxify yourself, own a liver, which most people do, I believe, and kidneys. The entry, this one is short enough that I can just read out the whole thing in full. It says, use specific foods. No, it does not provide a link to say which specific foods. Use specific foods as well as supplements to detoxify yourself of lifelong body pollution. Restore health and protect the body by removing fluoride, chloride, bromide, heavy metals, including toxins from chemtrails/geoengineering, EMFs, radiation, and other noxious substances. So yes, it does take a swerve immediately into the conspiratorial when it's talking about getting rid of that nasty fluoride and those chemicals from the chemtrails and the geoengineering, and also radiation, which I don't know if that works the same way as toxins. But anyway.
Well, you know, stuck with this voice, I'm going to do a bit of detoxifying myself with this lovely glass of H2O.
Haha, segueing nicely into the next point, point number 4, which is drink good, clean, or filtered water. Again,
and it worked. My voice is back to normal.
Well, there we go. I think that proves this entirely. Now, New Zealand doesn't, in most places, doesn't have problems with water supply so much, except for barring cases like the big storms a little while ago, when I think New Plymouth's main water trunk got taken out. And so they've built apparently they repaired the main water line and then built a backup one right next to the main one. So presumably if a tree falls again, that's going to take them both out. But anyway, but
we're a small country, and so we have sometimes limited imagination when it comes to fixing our problems.
Possibly, but certainly there are countries where you do need to be careful about the water you're drinking. But of course, mostly it's around in the context of this article, it's around getting rid of that nasty fluoride that they stick in our water to pacify us or lower our IQs or whatever it is that we're doing.
Now, the fluoride thing always fascinates me because I think many people who are anti-fluoride don't really understand the history of fluoridation of water, and that the reason why we put fluoride in water was that centuries ago people spotted there was a difference in caries, dental decay, between different regions in Europe, and they discovered that the difference was how much natural fluoride there is in your water supply. So fluoride is typically in water, it just happens to be at varying levels. And so it turned out that certain water supplies that had fluoride of a particular level led to people having less caries, less dental decay over time. And so other municipalities started adding fluoride to the water. There are some regions of the world where there is literally too much fluoride in the water, which is called fluoridation. I actually don't know how to pronounce the word. It's mottling of the teeth and this kind of weird brown thing that comes when you have too much fluoride in your water supply. So some parts of the world actually have to defluoridate their water to bring the fluoride level down. It's not a toxic byproduct which has been put into water as part of a corporate conspiracy. And yes, if you consume a large amount of fluoride into your stomach, that is not particularly good. But the amount of fluoride that is in water, both naturally and also due to fluoridization, doesn't cause those particular issues.
No, I think fluoride, it's one of many substances that our body kind of needs to live in trace amounts, but too much of it is bad for us. It annoys me a little bit. I followed one of the links off this with the sort of the anti-science scaremongering, where they'll say things like fluoride, which is an ingredient in rat poison, which, I mean, it probably is, but lots of other things are as well. Chemicals, you mix them together and they do different things. I always just like to say you take chlorine, a ridiculously poisonous gas, and mix it with sodium, a metal that explodes on contact with water, and you get table salt, which we can't live without. So that it's kind of like
and
saying,
is one of the most delicious substances ever created.
it's like saying chlorine, chlorine, this lovely substance which is, which exists in table salt. It's just not how it works. But no, we move from drink to food. With point number 5, eat organic food. Again, organic food is a little bit trendy. I haven't read anything that says, GMOs are actually horrible or bad for you, and indeed are just a step up from the sort of food husbandry that we've been doing for centuries, if not millennia. But yes, it's very much eat organic because GMOs are bad, and I suppose there are kind of two angles on the GMO stuff, isn't there? They're inherently bad and damaging for you, but there's also the side of GMOs are owned by corporations, so therefore by supporting genetic GMO food, you're ceding power to these corporations that are part of the NWO, which will one day destroy us all.
Yes, and that last point, apart from the aiding the NWO, I have a little bit of sympathy towards, because organizations like Monsanto, who own rights and marks on genetically modified organisms, can in some cases cause huge issues, particularly to developing economies, whereby they either come in and tell people use these seeds, they'll be great, and then a few years later go, oh, by the way, you need to pay a licensing for that, or they inhibit the ability for those economies to use genetically modified crops which are more resistant towards predators or diseases in their environment. So I can see why you might want to avoid GMOs to avoid giving power to those corporations. But there's very little evidence that non-genetically modified foodstuffs are any better for you than their genetically modified counterparts. And I say that as a vegan who eats plants all the time. I have a plant-based diet for everything. And I'm someone who tries to eat in season, so I try to only buy foodstuffs which are in a particular growing season. So when oranges are not being produced in New Zealand or oranges are not being grown in Romania, I don't have oranges. I eat according to what's available crop-wise in the country I'm living in. And if I can get organic stuff versus non-organic stuff, I will sometimes go for it because it does seem to have slightly better taste, although I'm also aware that there's a lot of psychological literature which indicates that the taste difference between organic versus non-organic food may just be a complete illusion. We think it's better because it's more expensive. Actually, those carrots don't taste any better anyway. But I'm not afraid to have the occasionally genetically modified organism on my table.
So that leads us to point 6, which is simply avoid junk food. again?
I will not have that. I will not have the avoidance of junk food. Junk food is brilliant. I know it's bad for me, but I still like it.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, again, a fair point. We know that too much junk food is bad for us. Too much high sugar processed food, it does lead to health problems. There's no argument there. But then, of course, it gets into GMO food is bad. Avoid cooking with a microwave oven and with non-stick coated or aluminium utensils, which in effect turns the food into junk food. Not quite sure how that works. Putting something in the microwave isn't exactly the same as processing all the stuff out of it. What do you lose from like processed food, like the white breads and so on?
Well, I mean, there are lots of different processings that go on. So the kind of processing you get for canned goods can lead to some nutrient leaching. White bread, well, I'm a brown bread person by preference because I think A, tastes better, and B, it's got more fiber. But as a heavily processed thing, I think it's more likely to be about, say, cannibalized, processed into sugar for the body. So something which is slightly harder to process is going to be better for you. But at the same time, one of the benefits of junk food, and something that often gets overlooked in these discussions, is that junk food is cheap and a very, very easy source of nutrients for lower income families. So in a situation where you need to make a decision about how much money you're going to be able to spend on food in a week, junk food's actually a very important part of the equation because it's often very cheap for very high energy output. And so if we're going to tell people to avoid junk food, we basically have to restructure our society in a socialist manner to ensure that people get good food all the time without having to spend large sums of money. Because the market has not provided good food cheaply. The market has provided bad food cheaply. What we need is socialism, Joshua. This list is going to lead us towards socialism, isn't it?
I don't see how that can be avoided, quite frankly. So point number 7 carries on the theme, but now extends it to use natural or organic home and personal care products. So organic shampoos and soaps and so on and so forth. And again, because GMOs are bad and processed ones are full of horrible toxins that will kill you stone dead. In my household, we've been trying to start using personal care type products with lower packaging. For environmental reasons, right? So sort of bars of soap wrapped in paper rather than bottles of squirty shower gel stuff that comes in a big plastic bottle that you throw away after you use it straight away. But that's because we have slight hippie-ish tendencies. But in terms of the actual ingredients of your home and personal care products, I don't know, I guess all the same arguments that apply to food apply to them, I suppose.
Yeah. I have nothing to say on this matter.
It's really just an extension of the same stuff already. So we've reached the halfway point, so we barrel on past the GMOs, but still in the arena of generally looking after yourself. Point 8 is avoid low-frequency EMFs, parenthesis, electromagnetic frequencies, close parenthesis, radiation. And it's a good thing they put those parentheses in, because I saw avoid EMFs and immediately ran out and smashed all my copies of Unbelievable. But it turned out it was all for naught.
Two princes, eh? Two princes.
That's the Spin Doctors.
Yes, you're right.
Yes. Okay. Just a little bit of 90s music humour there for you youngsters. Yes, so we're into a different arena of things that science says is okay, but which are secretly bad for you. So now we have electromagnetic radiation. So what do we have? We have power grid lines, cell phone towers, Wi-Fi sources, laptops, microwaves, mammograms and X-rays, compact fluorescent lighting as opposed to LED lighting, and then goes into a bunch of good anti-science jabs, which essentially is ignore all the science that says electromagnetic radiation isn't harmful, because anyone with a brain knows that it really is harmful. And it's
I
kind
would
of...
just like to point out that most of the people who would be reading this list would be reading it either on a laptop or a monitor, which is actually probably pumping out much more in the way of EMF than a laptop is going to. And so really 4.8, they should be say, avoid low frequency EMF, electromagnetic frequencies radiation, close your computer now, read no further.
But this point, and I think the next one, as we'll see, seem to be the most strong in terms of the don't believe these articles, believe these articles instead. And it starts to they don't make a great case for, or even back as far as point one with avoiding the mainstream media and going for your alternative sources. They don't really seem to make much of a case for why this science is better than that science, apart from claiming that the stuff which says electromagnetic radiation is fine is corporate sponsored by our global controlling overlords and therefore completely biased and unworthy. But yeah.
The issue here is that it's very hard to avoid EMF for the sheer fact that even if I sell all of my computing equipment, which will mean this podcast is basically over and done with, I have neighbors. They have a router. They have laptops. There is the sun that produces EMF as well. Electromagnetic frequencies are all around us.
Indeed.
Now I'm going to sound as if I'm going to become some kind of spiritual guru now. They're all around us. They're inside of us. They emanate from us, from our families, our friends, and our pets. EMF, it's unbelievable.
Nice. Nicely done. Yes, and indeed, if you happen to have a radio on your person and switch it on and it plays music, that means you're surrounded by radio waves, because you are, at all times, pretty much everywhere on the planet. So yes, they're a little hard to get away from.
Unless you're an ant.
Really?
Well,
if you're underground,
I'm not advocating people do the following experiment, and admittedly I've not done the following experiment. I don't have the necessary technology to do the experiment. Put an ant in a microwave and turn the microwave on, and ants will just move out of the way of the radiation being produced by the microwave.
Really?
They can just avoid it. Yeah. They can sense it, and they just move out of the way.
I have no wish to try that, but it's an interesting fact to know.
So ants can avoid radiation to their heart's content.
There you go.
So people should be more like ants
I think that's
and
true.
become part of a hive mentality and embrace the socialism this list is leading us towards.
Precisely. So point 9, again with the anti-science, avoid vaccines and vaccinations. And it's basically just...
And die of childhood diseases.
Vaccines are not safe and don't work, except they clearly do. Ask anyone with polio, oh no you can't because we don't have polio anymore.
I am actually quite curious how anti-vaxxers of this particular stripe explain why childhood diseases have been basically disappearing in sophisticated Western medical economies.
And indeed why they seem to be coming back in terms of measles outbreaks and so on, particularly in those places where vaccination rates are low. But yeah, this basically is just once again the same, your science is bad, our science is good, vaccines are bad because they just are stuff. So I think all the arguments we said about EMFs probably applies to vaccines. So we can shoot ahead to, back to our earlier theme of fighting the power. Point number 10, don't fall for joining the military.
We haven't fallen for joining the military.
No, oh, in fact, actually, I noticed the picture here is pictures of New Zealand armed forces. So at least they've localised the images in the article. That's nice. Yes, again, because obviously the military is a tool of the ruling elites, and indeed they go on to claim that the ruling elites' wars are secretly manufactured for power, profit, political gain, and a planned population reduction agenda. We haven't talked much about population reduction conspiracy theories, have we? That might be a good one for a...
No, but that's because, you know, as someone who is a member of the Voluntary Extinction League, I'm actively trying to reduce the population as we speak.
Oh, well, there we
Actually,
go.
that sounds as if I'm going around committing murders.
Yes.
I'm just not breeding.
Mm, mm.
Unlike you filthy breeder.
Yes, I've already replaced myself twice over. Although I suppose...
You're so fecund, Joshua. Why are you so fecund?
I just can't help it, ladies. Yes, the population, I mean, somewhere, it was either in this list or in one of the articles linked off it, there was the claim that there is already a plan in place to reduce the world's population by 90% because we're becoming too numerous for the global elites to control us, so they need to cull the population back to a more manageable number. But those are interesting sounding theories, if only because they let us riff on various supervillain schemes and things like that. So maybe it would be something to talk about in a later episode. But basically...
Although
yes.
one thing which does strike me here, there's an awful lot of these points which are conjunctions which I mostly agree with until the very last item.
Yes.
So as someone who is skeptical about the armed forces around the world and skeptical about the use of military power in a lot of situations, I can kind of buy into a thesis that says, look, most of the time when nations wage war, it is in fact the elites who are engineering situations where they gain power, profit and political gain either at home or overseas. So that particular part of the statement I don't have any particular issue with. It's the adding on and a planned population reduction agenda that makes me go, you had me up until that point, and a lot of the points in this list are sensible, and then this thing here.
Yeah. So that brings us to point 11. Have toxic amalgam fillings removed? Now, I have no idea on the science of this, quite frankly. They talk about mercury amalgam fillings. Were amalgam fillings did they ever have mercury in them? I actually...
Yes, in fact, actually some amalgam fillings today do.
Oh, there you go.
Once again, we're dealing with the chemistry thing. So
Yes.
mercury on its own, if you were to fill a abscess in your mouth with it, would be very, very bad, in the same respect that ingesting sodium and chloride by themselves would be a bad thing to do. But when you put mercury with other substances and create the amalgam, that amalgam is inert and doesn't lead to mercury leaching. At least modern amalgam fillings don't. In the same respect that adding sodium and chloride into sodium chloride, thus producing salt, ends up being perfectly fine and people's mouths don't explode. So yes, fillings can contain mercury, but in the same respect that salt contains sodium.
Yes. So the claim here is that fillings have been known to cause brain damage and lower your IQ and cause various mental ailments. And I mean, yeah, again, it's and the claim that dental decay can be prevented with good nutrition, like, for example...
But not with fluoride.
mouthwash.
So we have to stop filling people's teeth and remove fluoride and somehow prevent caries at the same time.
And I suppose there is an argument that proper dental care can prevent the need for dentistry further down the track. If you brush well and floss and don't eat too much of the wrong kinds of foods, you probably can avoid
But don't brush with a toothpaste that contains fluoride.
And indeed, obviously, they do have to stick in at one point. Don't support dentists who use mercury amalgam or fluoride. So they do manage to get a bit of anti-fluoride in there.
It's true. Whenever I go to my dentist, I like to get a large stock of fluoride.
Yep, I just fill up on it. Just say, fill me. One of my dentists did actually believe that there wasn't enough fluoride in the water in New Zealand and would give his own children fluoride tablets. But that's by the by. I think we're done with the sort of the personal care section of this listicle. The last few entries are more in the line of doomsday prepping, quite frankly. Number 12 is maintain well-stocked supplies of food and water. Which, I mean, we're all encouraged to keep a small cache of bottled water and canned foods and so on in case of disaster if we find ourselves without clean drinking water or power for any amount of time. So on its own, not necessarily a bad idea, but it's very much, In case of a crisis, stock up with a few weeks' supply of food and water in the hope that by then things would have died down with normal supply somewhat resumed. Actually, that's the sensible part, isn't it? Here we go. Such a crisis could be a financial one, like a currency collapse, or a fake... Oh, that's war. A fake war, a staged attack, faked alien invasion perhaps, you never know, or a HARP secret weather modification. So yes, they do manage to once again start out with reasonable sounding, sensible advice and then just swerve off the rails a little bit, because that's the kind of...
What I found interesting was that the image they used for this were canned goods, and previously they've talked about don't use processed foods, etc., etc. And yet there's a huge amount of conspiracy theories about what goes into canning foods, what goes into the lining of canned goods, and how that's being used as a way of introducing things into the population to enable population reduction. So maybe they could be a little bit more consistent and show, say, dried goods rather than canned goods. Although, of course, dried goods require a fair amount of processing. So people want to have canned goods in their cupboards come the apocalypse, because having canned goods in the apocalypse allows you to eat instantaneously, whilst having to soak your chickpeas for 12 hours before you cook them is just annoying. And you'll probably be killed by the cannibal gangs before you even get to make your hummus.
Indeed. Well, instead of canning your food, I suppose you could go on to point 13, which is maintain self-sufficiency, which is basically grow your own food, investigate, look into solar power or wind power or something to live off the grid. They suggest exchanging a certain amount of cash for a stockpile of precious metals, but basically prepare for the apocalypse, which we all know is coming.
Because as we know, when the apocalypse comes, people will want to barter with you for gold rather than things they can actually use to survive. Because a person with all the gold, even with no food, lives forever. Yeah. I mean, this notion that we need to stock up on precious metals for the collapse of civilization seems to ignore the fact that once civilization collapses and you return back to a barter economy, no one is going to care about precious metals.
Most likely.
People are going to care about food. They're going to swap food for food. They're going to swap food for luxuries like blankets, heaters, and the like. They're not going to go, I could eat tonight or I could get some more gold. Well, I'm going to get myself some more gold because that gold will be really useful when I'm starving to death.
Yes, although we did talk about, was it last episode or a few ago? Oh, it was 2 episodes ago with the Nisara and all the financial stuff. We did mention that return to a gold standard is very much a staple of various libertarian conspiracy theory type thinking, so I suppose it's not a surprise that it managed to worm its way in there.
And also, and let's face it, there's a bit of self-interest here. The kind of people who produce these listicles also tend to be the kind of people who advertise services to allow you to buy gold or trade your money in for precious metals. So there's a little bit of self-interest going on here as well. Buy our goods, including buy our gold.
Which brings us to the end of the list, just in time for the end of this episode, I think. Number 14 is simply spread the word, which I guess is what we're doing now. So in a way, we too are tools of this article, and it was really right all along, I guess.
Yes, now the snarkers have been snarked.
Yep, we sure have. They really. The
listiclers have been listed.
Yeah. Although I did notice in other similar articles I linked to from this one and other ones on the site, there did seem to be a sort of an air of frustration in some of these of the why won't people listen to us when we tell them that their every move is controlled by a ruling New World Order who may or may not be lizards. We're not quite clear on that. And I mean, I guess I can understand a bit of frustration from anyone with a particular viewpoint, especially when you're saying, large aspects of our lives are controlled by faithless corporations who do not have our best interests at heart. Yeah, that's probably actually true, and we are fairly complacent about it. But Yeah, this particular the flavour of this particular last point, telling us to spread the word, seemed very much along the lines of, so people will actually maybe start listening to us to assuage some of our frustration at being these Cassandras of the modern world. Bit of ancient Greek there for you. Ancient Greek? Yes.
Yep. You're talking about the Trojan War.
Yes, I am. Apparently. I never did ancient Greek. I did Egyptian at university. It seemed more fun. I don't know.
Was it though? Was it?
Sometimes. You got to look at...
See, I would say if you're going to do any of the ancient cultures, you want to do Rome, because Rome is just basically a pack of backstabbing bastards for hundreds of years.
Yep, so
whilst Egypt, it's simply begat.
Yeah, and then this one built a pyramid. But yes, there you have it. You now know how to protect yourself from the NWO agenda. You're welcome, frankly.
Yep, and we learnt some interesting things. I learnt that the NWO is not the NWA. And Josh, what did you learn?
I learned that they are the hierarchy enslaving you. That's practically Buseyism. Do you follow Gary Busey on Twitter?
No. Should I?
That. Yeah, it's not bad. Like every now and then it'll just be like, I just made spaghetti for the first time. But he's a big fan of coming up with sort of meaningful acronyms for everyday words, so that the hierarchy enslaving, although he's not overly conspiratorial, but that's the kind of thing that would be right up his alley. I think Gary Busey would get a kick out of that one. And if Gary Busey would approve, then I approve.
It's true. If it gets the Busey smile of approval, then we're going to smile along with him.
Ah, what a smile. So we're at the end of the list. We're at the end of the episode. Have you anything to add before we sign off?
No, I'm just going to say word.
Yeah, I think you should. So, in that case, you have been listening to and possibly watching, if it doesn't screw up the recording like it did last week a little bit, the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. We are... we're not co-located. What's the opposite of co-located?
Bilocated?
We are bilocated. We are bifurcated through the fabric of the universe. Me in Auckland, New Zealand. He in Bucharest, Romania. My name is, of course, Josh Addison. If you wanted to get in touch with me, you could chuck me a message on Twitter where my username is monkeyfluids, or use one of the other platforms that we'll be talking about shortly. But you, sir, tell us your name and designation and general contact business.
Name, M.R. Extenteth. Designation, human. Title, doctor. Can be found on planet Earth, circa 20th and 21st century. Website is episto.org. Contents of website includes reviews of articles, links to podcast, and mentions of forthcoming articles. This is your information splurge.
Well, I asked for that, didn't I? If you want to find this podcast, well, obviously you know where to find this podcast because you're listening to it right now, but you may not know that as well as being on the platform that you're listening to it on, it's on other ones. It's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, it's on a few other ones. It's at conspiracism.podbean.com, podbean.com being the site where this podcast is officially hosted. You can go to various of those places and leave us comments, leave us reviews, do the whole like and subscribe business or whatever it is you kids are into these days. You could also go on Facebook and simply search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy to find our Facebook page. You can go on YouTube and search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy to find the channel with video versions of most of these episodes when the sound isn't ridiculously out of sync in the recording, which seemed to be what happened last week. And I think, oh, of course, the patronage. We've said thank you, many thank yous to our patrons at the top of this episode. But if you wish to join their illustrious ranks, you can go to Patreon and search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, or you can go to that Podbean page, once again, conspiracism.podbean.com, and sign up to Podbean's native patronage system as well. And I think that we have come to the very end, the very end.
We have. Well, so I think there's only one thing to do.
Is it say goodbye?
It's apologize to Daniel. I'm sorry, Daniel.
Sorry, yes, no. Thank you very much, and
Sorry.
sorry, and goodbye.
Yeah. Goodbye. Sorry. Sorry.
See ya.
Bye.
You've been listening to a podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, hosted by Josh Edison and Im Dented. If you'd like to help support us, please find details of our pledge drive at either Patreon or Podbean. If you'd like to get in contact with us, email us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.